Have you ever wondered how fun a horror masterpiece such as Alien could translate over to gaming? I mean, you'd have to have a perfect atmosphere and constant tension in order to perfect that kind of game. Well, of course you haven't, because we have the horror masterpiece that is Alien Isolation. Now, I'm man enough to admit that I ended up quitting that game a quarter of the way through because it got really scary. Xenomorphs started showing up. I said, nah, I'm good. That's good enough for me. But today's video isn't on Alien Isolation. No, today we're talking about a little bit of a lesser known topic. What if I told you that there was a game that no one knows about, that not only clearly has passion behind it and a scary atmosphere, but is also multiplayer? Well, today we're talking about the unknown game, Exome.
What was that? What? What is that?
Shoot! Whoa.
Before we get into the swing of things, why not drop a like? And if you end up not enjoying what you see, you can always take the like away. Any interaction would always be highly appreciated. Now, everything from this point onwards will have light to heavy spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, please don't watch this video and go buy the game. I can't stress this enough. Please go buy the game and experience it yourself before you watch this video. This is a game best experienced when you have no idea what's going on and you're terrified of everything. It's an awesome experience and it only costs you $15. Plus, it's in early access and the developer's always adding new stuff. And you'll only have more game to play as time passes. But now that all that's out of the way, without further ado, let's get into the video. When starting the game, the players presented with a screen giving them all the information they need in order to start. The players told about a project satellite called Eagle Eye, which detected anomalous activity in the Rocky Mountains. Now, as you could guess, researchers were sent to the Rocky Mountains, and I'm sure as you could have guessed again, they haven't been heard of since. So now, it's up to you, the player, to determine what happened to the team and if you can assist them. So after finally landing in the Rockies, it's the middle of the night. Me and my partner were only equipped with a pistol and a flashlight. After looking around for a bit, we found this funny looking scientist camp. I mean, look at this thing, you'd have to be blind to miss it. Well, we ended up looking around for a little bit and stumbled upon some data logs and a platform not too far away from camp. The platform activated when we both stood on top of it and waves of enemies started attacking us.
I just don't see it.
This is where we meet our first enemy type. Now, I have no idea what anything's supposed to be named, so I'm giving them all nicknames as we go. Now, the first enemy type is what I like to call the Grub. The Grub is decently fast and likes to swerve around so that you miss your shots. Now, it may be agile, but it doesn't deal too much damage and generally isn't too difficult of an enemy. Upon surviving that initial onslaught, it was pretty easy to realize that our goal wasn't really to save anyone because, let's be honest, in a game like this, they were all dead from the start. But our real goal was to activate the platforms and survive the attacks. So, that's just about the general overview of what the game's about. Gameplay mostly consists of running around some paths in the forest. You generally want to find some locations here or there, you know, like a abandoned house or a cool farm, or grab some data logs of, you know, the people who you were supposed to save. Grab a couple upgrades, you know, as per usual, and as you would guess, finish all those platforms. So the first thing I really want to get into in terms of this game's design is the atmosphere. This game does an awesome job at making you feel like you're never safe. Like, there's always something watching you from afar, or anything could be in the forest with you. There were several times me and my editor were looking around the map for new gear or new platforms, and we swore that something had just vanished in the corner of our eyes. It just always felt like there was something there that we could never see but was always within arm's reach. We would hear twigs and snapping and sometimes noises that we couldn't really put our fingers on in the distance. And no, this definitely isn't foreshadowing. See how you could hear the air quotes? But anyways, whether intentional or not, this game's sound design and atmosphere are top notch for an indie horror experience. Not to mention the animals, which absolutely scared the living fuck out of both of us playing.
Oh no, it's a wolf.
That's so loud.
It's a wolf.
That's so loud.
In terms of getting scared though, animals did a lot of that for us. Animals generally played a decent little role in the game due to the usefulness in hunting them. There are different species you can hunt in order to receive currency for all the various upgrades you'll be needing to stay alive. And the order I figured from most to least was bear at 250 and doe at 100. Now there are a lot of different species in the middle, starting at the highest with boar down to wolf, rabbit, fox, and buck. Now I actually really liked that there was a reason to hunt. That also leads me to a point that I'd like to mention. There's not a lot that you can do with enemy corpses. Now, for a game that has some really crazy enemy variants and so many different enemies to fight, I'd like to see at least a little something more to do with the enemy corpses. Now, there's, I'm sure, a ton of things you could think of creatively, and I'm sure that the developer has things he wants to do in the future, but I think, you could at least have a couple of systems going on, maybe a smaller amount of money gained from basic enemy corpses, or maybe a collectible that you can gain from gathering enough corpses in general. Or maybe there could even be a research system that unlocks more upgrades after killing a certain amount of enemy types. I think all those could be pretty cool things that could lead to better gameplay diversity, as well as a little bit of extra stuff you can do in between the platforms, as some of that time could really end up as dead air. So, future Bruce here, while editing the videos and talking about the script and doing all this fun stuff that I have to do, we actually lost all of our footage twice. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in a different section, but on our latest playthrough of the game, a certain new enemy popped up that actually drops money when he dies. He dropped about 10k for us. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but I think it'd be nice to mention just because it's pretty cool that an idea I've had for a couple months just happened to get patched in during the time that I've been making this video. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Despite a lack of anything to do with most enemy bodies, after fighting enemy waves and finishing a platform, the platform spawns a ton of money via vases that the players can grab. It's really nice to have that level of progress as you continue the game, because just hunting animals for hours is really, really boring after a certain amount of time. Me and my editor ended up going in and out of this ravine at the top of the map probably like 10 or 11 times, because for some reason, every time you do that, it just spawns like 4 animals generally, like at a minimum. So we just grinded money up there until like we had enough to buy what we wanted initially before we really started grinding the platforms, because you just need a little bit of equipment for those. So at the least, there's at least one more reason to complete platforms other than just completing the game, because the currency they drop can really boost how you end up playing the game. The first thing we decided to do in our gameplay was search the entire map for platforms and areas of interest. Now the game is nice enough to label map locations as you go, so you can come back to most of them, although not all of them get labeled after you discover them, which I find kind of odd, as if you highlight, a platform, you should be able to find, random abandoned cabin number 3 in the corner as well. But outside of stuff like that and weird mild complaints I have, we were most interested in like data logs from the scientists and upgrades such as the shotgun and thermal vision. So those things can also be found in like relatively easy to figure out areas. Like data logs are where the scientists have been around, studying whatever they needed to, and upgrades were generally found in areas of interest like the abandoned barn, for example. At the end of our search, we had obtained various weapons, which I'll talk about more in a second, thermal vision, which is probably the best upgrade, and grenades, which is probably like the least useful thing in the game. Now, there were a couple of other things that were miscellaneous that helped us out in smaller ways, like reloads as being faster slightly. Those were all nice little buffs to get if we had a little extra cash to spend on them. Now, the one upgrade we never found was a stamina upgrade, which I hope gets added in the future, because stamina doesn't really last that long when you're in a fight. Please, 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 if you're listening to this, add a stamina upgrade. It'd be really nice. Back onto the topic of weapons, the AR was the most consistent and useful weapon, and is basically required if you want to live a prosperous, ecosystem destroying life like us.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Alright, let's go do some platforms.
I hope. Ah. Ah.
Oh my god!
The sniper is by far the most powerful gun in the game, but it's mainly used at a longer range because the scope zooms in and it's pretty hard to hit stuff when they're closer. Now, it's also good to mention as well that I was playing this with my editor, so generally he would just be spraying stuff with an AK while I'm sniping from further away, so when there's larger enemies, which we'll talk about a little later, I could just snipe them in the head, boom, problem gone, he's shooting the little things as they come up, life's better. But if you're by yourself, the sniper really isn't that great of an option because you're gonna get overrun pretty quick. The shotgun is the best weapon if you're overrun, especially if you're solo because you can use the best method, which we discovered, which we like to call bunny hopping away and quickly taking pot shots at the aliens.
I got thermal vision instead.
Ow! Now the next weapon is the base weapon you start the game with, which I guess I haven't really explained until now, but you start the game with just a pistol, and that's like all you have until you find more blueprints, which is fine because it has infinite ammo, you know, standard start the game and shoot stuff kind of gun. But at the end of the day, it's not really a viable weapon. I mean, you can have two of them, one in the first slot and one in the fourth slot, so that's kind of cool. You can't dual wield them as far as I can tell. Although that'd be a pretty cool feature to add in the future. Developer, if you're listening to this, that's a cool idea. I'm not too cocky, but come on. That's a kind of good idea. Come on. Any takers? No? Alright, well, that's fine. But back onto the pistol, there's just not a lot of reasons to use it. I mean, if you run out of ammo with your other guns, I mean, sure. It's the only weapon with infinite ammo, so cool. But aside from that, the last actual weapon you can get in the game is the grenade, which isn't exactly super useful, except in like really, really situational moments, because you can't cook it, and they take just a bit too long to explode to realistically kill anything chasing you before you die. Not to mention the fact that they hurt you as well when they blow up, so you can't just like martyrdom yourself. You gotta plant those pretty specifically. In terms of weapons I'd like to see added in the future, I would definitely say it's really odd that there isn't a melee option of any sort, even just like punching with your gun. At least as far as I can tell, I didn't go looking through the controls too much for it. I might have missed it, but there's nothing really up front that tells you can melee. And, you know, I'm not a really incredible fella, so I'd like to see anything like, you know, throwing a katana in there. Okay, maybe not a katana, it's a bit much, but you get the idea. It just would have been nice to see some sort of melee weapon so you don't only have the super weak pistol if you run out of ammo, or the shotgun if you're point blank. Being able to stab something would be a little nice and might even open a couple of challenge runs up for people who are interested. In one area, we ended up encountering a parkour section, the area being the church that I mentioned earlier. Now, to be honest, it can be a little bit frustrating, especially when you're first starting out. Me and my editor, as I've mentioned before, have played this game 3 times now. So at the end of the third playthrough, if we couldn't do the parkour, you know, first or second try, it's probably a little embarrassing. But especially when you're starting, it's really difficult because there's like a crouch jump mechanic that the developers explain on a couple different threads. It's a little like weird to get used to. As well as sometimes parkouring just feels a little weird, like sometimes sprint feels like you're a little faster in the air, and sometimes moving your camera will glitch you off a platform. Some falls felt like they weren't really our faults, but, you know, to be fair, the most important upgrades in the game, in my opinion, are locked behind getting to the top of this church and doing the parkour. So you get a code to get the best weapon, if you're playing with others at least, and you also get the thermal vision. So with the thermal vision and the weapon, which was the sniper, the thermals are an upgrade that you really can't play the game without, as they let you see the enemies in the pitch black and dark of the night. Now with the sniper's not technically given to you at the top. You actually have to find this hidden little cabin on the right side of the map, and you have to put in this code you find in the top. Pretty creative stuff, and it opens up this cool secret lab underneath where you can go grab the schematic for the rifle. Now, despite my small complaints with the parkour, I don't really mind it at all because you literally get the best stuff in the game, at least if you're playing in multiplayer. And at the bare minimum, you're getting thermal vision, which you pretty much can't play the game at night without, or at least do the platforms at night, because you're going to have 200 enemies on you, and if you don't have thermal vision to light them up, you're just going to be shooting at black, dark, and shadow. So there's not a ton you can do there. It's finally time to get into the enemy talk. So after every platform or every other platform, we're attacked by newer and stronger enemy types. Now, for me personally, the enemy design is phenomenal, but I just happen to love the Ridley Scott style of aliens that this game was clearly inspired by. There ended up being a total of around 5 unique enemy types that we encountered, of which we're really unsure if there are any extra because in all the times we've played the game, we've actually found new things most of the times. So I don't know, maybe a 4th playthrough we'd find another new enemy. There also might be new enemies by the time this video comes out because, as I explained earlier, there are some enemies that released that we straight up never saw before that weren't in the game because the developers adding new things, which is really cool. So back onto the enemy types though, the first one that we encountered was the grub that I mentioned earlier, with some of the other ones looking more inspired by classic xenomorphs. The second enemy type we ended up nicknaming the crawlers. Now, the crawlers are responsible for about 2 of the types because there's smaller variants and larger variants. The smaller ones don't pose too much of a threat past getting the assault rifle, and they kind of crawl on the ground with a tail that strikes you, hence the name crawlers. The third and fourth enemy type I kind of combined because they're very similar as well, which are the runners and the large runners. These guys are absolutely huge and will chase you down. They deal tons of damage and are the number 1 enemy type they should be dealt with before they get close. The runners and large runners are the most similar in design to xenomorphs and look absolutely awesome. I'm such a big fan of their designs. While I'm still on the topic of enemy types, I do think that there should be more variety in the future. While I love the designs and I'm sure the developers have plans for the future, finding the same couple enemy types, at least for the platforms, over and over could get pretty boring if the game were longer. Now currently the game's actually at a pretty good length. I don't think it's much longer than about 2 to 2.5 hours depending on what playthrough you're on. For me and my editor, I mean a playthrough's probably about an hour long tops, but I recall our first one being just about 2 to 2.5, somewhere in there. Introducing something like a flying enemy type, or maybe one that stalks and ambushes you both inside and outside of combat, could do wonders for the gameplay. Future Bruce moment again. So, as I said earlier, we've played this game a total of 3 times, and during those 3 playthroughs, things have changed pretty drastically. One of the huge changes was actually the introduction of, I think, around 3 entities, depending on if one is the same. Now, we had no idea these things existed on our 3rd playthrough, and they actually made the game 100 times more scary, and it was like we were playing it for the first time again. It was actually a really cool experience because we really liked our first playthrough, and being able to have a cool experience like that again is something you don't really get with a lot of games. The first 2 entities were some like flying being in the sky as well as some crazy invisible enemy. Here's some of the clips of our gameplay to show you what these things did to us.
You don't need more money. I'm gonna take this.
What was that?
What?
You didn't... What? What is that?
Shoot it! Shoot it! Whoa!
I heard like a woman scream. I looked... What is happening?
I don't know.
This is new. Ah!
Where'd it go?
It's invisible. It's invisible. Ah! What is happening? Help! Yo, let me hit that. Let me hit that heal.
Pick up specimen. It gave me 10K.
The other entity that was added was some weird grayling looking alien that stalked us behind some trees. Yet again, here are reactions.
What the f is that?
What?
Turn around.
What?
What the fuck was that?
It's almost like the developer knew we were making this video and had to terrify us in the process. Nonetheless, it's absolutely an awesome couple additions to the game, and I really hope we see more stuff like this in the future, because stuff like this just keeps you on guard for the rest of the game. The entire time after that, we only had like 1 or 2 more platforms to go. The entire time we were watching our backs and listening for more noises. It was just such a cool experience, so I really appreciate this addition. It's really cool stuff. But anyways, Future Bruce signing out. Something that would have at least made the game a little bit more scary just for me personally would have been something like a weird deer enemy. If you don't know what a weird deer is, well, let me give you like a small idea. They're essentially a cryptid that stem from weird encounters with deer that don't really seem like they're actually animals, but in fact something else entirely. Because there's so many deer in this game, I think it'd be really terrifying to think that you're hunting a normal deer, only for it to stand on its hind legs and crook its neck and then come to kill you. I know it's a little niche, but I'm a huge nerd about cryptids and horror in general, if you couldn't already tell, and I think it'd be a really cool addition to the game's horror elements. On topic of enemy encounters, instead of just talking about designs or interesting aspects that could be integrated into the game later, most of the encounters go pretty similar. Enemies bomb rush you, you either kill them or start running, and then every once in a while your turn to shoot them occasionally and you repeat the process. Now when enemies get close, and trust me, they'll be close very often, they attack the player as you'd expect. Now sometimes after attacking, they'll retreat and do a sort of hit and run tactic. Now this is really annoying, especially later on when you're deeper into the platforms, because you'll have to be focusing on larger enemies, and then up comes that one crawler or grub that you forgot to kill, and now he's back to avenge his whole little grub family. After we finally completed the last platform, all we had to do is find this large platform in the middle of the map. Now, we've already found that by this time, I mean, you're going to cross it eventually. There's a couple of interesting structures by this as well that probably add on to the lore a little bit, but I'm not going to theorize too much in this video because I'm just a silly little guy on the internet. What do I know? But back to the platform, we thought we would have a huge fight on our hands, but when we ended up approaching the platform, this happened.
I kind of hope not, because too much stuff has happened. Okay. Weird black hole. Your name tag's in the way and it's really hurting my immersion.
Yours is too. Big old T-Rex. Because why not?
That's not half as scary as what we had to deal with.
And that is where the game currently ends. So now that I've talked about most things, hopefully I've covered things in a pretty good detail that doesn't take too much of your time up at the same time. It's time to talk about the lore. So I'm sure after that ending, you're probably wondering what in the world just happened. Well, the lore in this game is pretty limited as far as things you're told upfront, but it's quite interesting nonetheless. Now, I've mentioned the scientist logs a couple times in the video, as well as the scientists themselves, and that's generally where we get most of the game's lore. Now, instead of reading each individual log and making this video 100 times longer than it needs to be, I'm gonna give y'all a synopsis and flash the logs on screen for you if you want to read them yourselves. From what I can gather, and for the most part, 5 different scientists go about their business and reference areas of interest that the player could find. Almost every scientist recalls having seen a being that stood on 2 legs stalking them in the forest, and some describe it looking as humans, while others call it a creature with claws. These are most likely 2 different beings, as one of them is most definitely the thing that stalked us in the forest, as well as the other one. There's 100 different explanations. It could be any of the enemies we meet in the game. It could also be the final boss. Now, the only scientist to have not seen a being, Dr. Fitzloff, mentions how the company they're working for are about to send experts to solve their problems, which he firmly believes to not be good. All of the scientists end up dead. Some died in miscellaneous ways, such as being crushed by a rock, and others were killed by whatever's lurking in the dark. And that's just about all the lore as we know it right now. Short, concise. I know there's not a lot to talk about. There's not a lot you can really speculate on either. I mean, well, I guess that's a lie. I'm a liar. There is a lot you can speculate on. I mean, at one point, I don't think we have any footage of it, but I did find this like really large hole that just went straight into the ground. It looked like it was like miles long, covered up by some shrubbery. Some of the caves are very odd. It also looks like we're almost in like a meteor site. Like, there's just so much interesting stuff going on and so many elements, but there's not a lot really told to you up front. So, as I said, it's just about where things end. It's time to close the video. So here we are at the end of the video. Now for me, I think Exome is just such a fantastic game, especially for an indie game. It has so much content additions. I mean, even just in terms of the time span it's taken me to make this video, it's already had a couple clear, as you can see from me getting jumped by all the weird enemies that spawn for us. I mean, things are constantly getting added before the full release, and I think the solo developer making this is doing an awesome job. I'd really love to see y'all go support them and give them all the love that they really deserve for making this passionate project of theirs a reality that deserves its full release. Now, I really hope they'll take as much time as they need to really perfect it, as it could use a little bit of polishing. I know I've complained a little bit here and there, but genuinely this game is such a little hidden gem, and I think it's so perfect. And some of the issues it has even gives it a little bit of charm. But I do hope in the future some things are changed, you know, as always. And as for that final cutscene, I hope that we get to fight that thing. I mean, it's such a cool thing. I mean, a Xenomorph T-Rex, you're never gonna see me complain about that. It's a little silly, but come on now. Pin me up against that, give me a flamethrower or something, I'm going in all the time.
There we go. Yeah. Of course,
Okay, thank God.
And if you ended up making it this far into the video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. That count could really help with my motivation to make future videos, and it even helps with my motivation to just keep making stuff better than the stuff that came before it. I really have a passion for doing this stuff. I'm really big nerd when it comes to like alien stuff or even just video games and movies in general. So I'd love to just take the time to be able to talk about it, and talk about it, you know, on a platform that also likes to hear me talk about it. I'd also love to hear all of y'all's speculation or ideas for where the game will go in the future, and all the lore ideas that you guys have in the comments below. Anyways, thank y'all so much for watching, and as always, stay fresh.